they had this mentality that if something's old, it's mature and it's better, and so they think it's more secure if something is older. Except
that's not a flawed logic.
Which doesn't work in technology. That's like the only place where that mentality doesn't work is technology. When you're buying a product, like I'm buying, I don't know, whatever, a comb. It's good if the company's older. I know it's going to be a good product. That doesn't work in technology, you know. Computer, but not software.
Actually, there are some arguments for that when it comes to technology, and that if it's brand spanking new, nobody has had time yet to really run it to really run it through its paces and test for all its vulnerabilities. However,
a lot of the newer hardware is actually more mass-produced and is more prone to breakage. We live in more of a use-it-and-throw-it-away society than we did 20 years ago.
And that does kind of piss me off a little bit, to be quite honest. But
I'm not saying brand spanking new. I'm just saying that there's a sweet spot in technology where if it gets too old, it's going to be unsecure. If it's too new, it's going to be unsecure.
There's that bubble in between that this is the more secure stuff.
And it's different for all kinds of software and hardware. You want to get that sweet spot where the bugs have been worked out, but it's still getting supported.
Yeah, you know what's really hysterical about that little tidbit, that's what our federal government is using our taxpayer dollars to support. Aside from that, is you ever wonder if government people are incompetent? They asked them, you know, why don't you use Firefox or other browsers? And the response to why they didn't use Firefox is Firefox costs too much money. Does anybody wonder why we're having a hard time filling that technology czar position?
The funny thing is there are some governments. I don't work for the federal government. I've mentioned it in my videos in my live show. I actually work for the state of Kentucky. And as of the last couple of years, they've actually started implementing more open source initiatives. Firefox is now an acceptable alternative. OpenOffice is now acceptable. It's getting the individual departments to start using it that's the problem.
Yeah.
The department that I work for, when I started working there, they had a website that was from 1997. Needless to say, I've been there for a year. So their website was 10 or 11 years old.
So you can now walk in and look yourself in the mirror without shame now, right?
I'm actually a website developer, so I took that site and I threw it away. Now there's a new site that is compatible with everything but IE6.
Yeah. Well, no, it's like, and the thing here is, it depends what other government agencies they have to interact with. Because if they have to interact with an agency that's still in this archaic IE6 only, Microsoft Word, whatever suite, blah only, who's using that Word only format with a Word only extension, basically something that just won't translate. They don't have a choice. They have to use what they're using just to some of that. But honestly, because it's my money that's funding government services, because it's my money, damn it. Because it's my money, I'm of the firm belief that government services, especially ones that are publicly accessible, like libraries, schools, things like that, should be embracing open source rather than rejecting it. I'm glad to hear that's starting to change.
Not necessarily open source, but open standards.
Open standards, open source, and cross-platform, which means they shouldn't just be moving towards one, they should be neutral. They should not be favoring one over the other. It pisses me off to no avail that there are libraries that give books or other things with DRM that only works with Windows. I may hate OS X, but I think and I'm a Linux user, but I'm like, you know what, if it's coming from a library or a school, that better work with every OS that somebody could possibly have at home. That's how it needs to work. That's
at least Windows, Mac, and Linux. I mean, you can't support every OS.
Okay, every common one. But, you know, Windows, Mac, and Linux, and you can even argue BSD, and odds are if you support Linux, you probably will work with BSD.
Well, what defines common? I mean, a lot of people might say, even though I think that 1% of all computer users is a huge number, a lot of people might say that's just too small to warrant supporting. We just need to support Windows and Mac and we're good. What do you say to
I would say to that, if you're going to support Mac, you need to support Linux, which would void the thing I was complaining about. But because, like I said, by some unofficial estimates, Linux isn't that small. It's even though it is on the official ones, and that's one of the things I'm like deathly afraid that we're going to hand the next generation of textbooks over to iTunes. Some people think I'm wearing a tinfoil hat. I don't think that's that crazy of an idea.
I'm pretty afraid of it too.
I'm seeing it happening at some schools, to be honest.
Goodness.
There's already some colleges that are doing it, and there's some grade schools that are doing it.
The problem is that iTunes purposely makes so that it doesn't work with wine.
Hmm?
I mean, this is what I've read, is that when wine gets an older version of iTunes to work,
Apple immediately breaks it.
Always break it. It's like they're adding something, and same with iPods, that they got it to work under wine, and that this update to iPods doesn't seem to do anything else, doesn't add any functionality, any security update, but it all of a sudden doesn't work with Linux.
You know, I think we can top that on the #1 wrong thing to do if you want Linux users to buy your hardware or software. I think that tops the list. It's like, go out of your way to continually break it. It's like, well, all right. Anything else y'all can think of to go on to in this, or any other points to make on this? We've kind of jumped all over the place, but covered some things. I'm getting a nod as a no, Jordan. Okay.
No.
Okay. Oh, I guess it's a little short, but hey, that's a show. Since we have a little bit of time left, in case there's anyone who's in a position of power to actually go, maybe we should sell our software to Linux. We're all Linux users. What's the one piece of software that you would say, and I know this is blasphemy, that you would say maybe you're missing on Linux?
Personally, I've never used it before, but I can see where it's 100% necessary. Adobe After Effects.
So basically the Adobe Creative Suite.
Yeah, that would be good too, yeah.
Okay.
I mean, as far as video editors, like we talked before, we've got a great suite of video editors out there. It's just the finer aspects of the more advanced editing things.
Yeah, it's the finer aspects of video, image, and Flash and other things like that, which is all part of the...
Just general media, I would say.
Yeah.
Because, I mean, there are a ton of media apps out there. It's just that so many of them are Mac only, or Mac and Windows only. And the Linux community at large has done a wonderful job of making alternatives, or making even clones in some cases. But in some ways, they're just not as good as the original. And that might be a matter of time. That might be a matter of it just not ever happening until... As
some of that's also a matter of certain legal issues. Because of the way... Unfortunately, there aren't... hopefully this changes in the near future, but right now, this is largely a proprietary world, so you have to be playing in the proprietary ballpark, and that costs money, because there's the licensing and other things that go along with it that just prevent it being truly open source and truly, even aside from the costs, it can't be purely open source until that changes.
Well, and realistically, if a company like Adobe wanted to just compile their software into binaries and sell them with licensing keys that had to connect to their server, I would guarantee you they would clean up on Linux.
I'd be one of the first people to buy that, because I use Adobe stuff all the time, but I have to use it under crossover or Windows Virtual Machine. I would pay for that because it would allow me to streamline my machine infinitely better. And James, you're saying iTunes?
Yeah, I would say the main reason I see getting people to switch to Linux is iTunes. When I'm talking about, people should try Linux, the main reason, more than Photoshop or games, is iTunes. Single application, just iTunes. And the problem sure, but there was no good way to sync your iPod.
There's plenty of good ways to sync your iPod, but you have to use a different application. Like if you're in KDE, RMOC's good. And in Ubuntu, I forget what it's called, but there are other apps. You also get
Box and Banshee can do it.
Yeah, you also get
at the time I wasn't able, no matter what I did, to get Rhythmbox, Amarok, Banshee to do it at the time. I've heard that stuff has been fixed.
It's been fixed for a little over 2 years now.
It was about a couple years back that I had this problem. No matter what I did.
Yeah, it's recently been fully fixed in a way that isn't being broken. It seems for iPhones.
That is the main reason that I've heard. And there's also Photoshop, but a lot of people have iPods.
Well, no. That's the thing. I would argue that because of you can now sync now fully on a Linux box, even if you have an iPod. And I hate Apple, and I'm not buying any more Apple Media devices until Apple fixes this problem you're talking about. But I do have one here. I'm not buying a new one until they fix this. Instead, I'm moving to other things because I'm not jumping through hoops for Apple and changing my computers here to make them happy. This is not going to happen. A media device is not that important to me. They want my money, they'll fix this problem. The thing that gets to the aside, you can do syncing, but what you can't get is the device updates. That can be done only through iTunes. The software updates, especially for things like iPhones. And I don't think you should have to choose between, okay, if I'm on Linux, I need to use an Android or another smartphone. If you're on Linux and you want to use an iPhone, you should be able to. Even though I don't like the iPhone and I don't think it's a particularly good device, if you think it does, use it. And you shouldn't have to choose a platform for it. The easiest solution for Apple to do, if they're going to play this we have to continually break iTunes game that they seem to want to play, is make an open hook for the iTunes database. And that I can add my iTunes account to something like RMOC or anything else, and I can get access to the iTunes marketplace. You know, even make it a paid service. Basically put iTunes on the cloud. And that would also alleviate one of my big concerns about the fact that iTunes is going to wind up in charge of certain media that it shouldn't, like textbooks and other things, because if that system is universally accessible through other things, it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
And I think the BBC exclusively delivers their online stuff through iTunes. You can't get it anywhere else.
Yeah, they're wildly powerful. iTunes, it's amazing because I mean there's so many Apple devices and iPods in particular. 1 in 5 people in America have an iPod, and I'm not just talking a media player, just an iPod.
Yeah,
that's huge. It's ridiculous, and that's not talking iPhones and all these other devices which are going to use iTunes.
Well, and honestly, the iPod is one.
Too much power.
No, the iPod is one of the few Apple devices. I don't really have any actual problems with the hardware of the device itself. My problem with the device is the iTunes boomerang effect. That's my only problem with that device. The device itself, I think, is actually pretty good. It's the iTunes boomerang that goes with it it's the backdooring effect. Anyways,
now speaking on that, the one way that I can see iTunes actually making it to Linux is if they took the approach that Skype is slowly working on. If they offered an SDK to allow the outside apps to connect to the iTunes service.
Yeah, that's what I'm talking about. Yeah.
I can't see that as being anything but a plus for Apple.
Well, no, it's like if Apple did that, they would get my money. I would start giving Apple money again. I haven't given Apple money for years because they said we don't want your money. I like Doctor Who. I like Top Gear. I like a bunch of stuff. I have to either buy the DVDs, I have to pirate it illegally, or I have to get it through iTunes. And if they made it easy where I didn't have to switch my platform to access it, they would get loads of money off of me. That's just... They don't want my money. They said, we don't want your money. Your money's bad. It comes from Tux. Like, okay. Anyways, anything else to say, or should we